You're listening in on an animated discussion about Superman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. In today's topic, bringing us back from the lengthy hiatus of the late summer, early fall, is The Last Son of Krypton, parts 1, 2, and 3. That's right, we're going to cover all three parts of the premiere of Superman the Animated Series. Now, I think, Joshua, before we even go any further, this is obviously a shift for listeners. We're talking about a different show, all set, technically set in the DC animated universe. But this is Superman, the animated series, and there's a few differences I think we should highlight just to get kick things off, because it is going to impact our format just a little bit. So first and foremost, I think the thing that listeners might miss the most, or at least we will miss the most, is the title cards. So for listeners just tuning in, Batman the Animated Series always started with a title card in which kind of like set the tone and expectations for the episode. And we no longer have those in Superman the Animated Series.
I miss them already. I really love the title cards, and they're so rare in television anymore. And granted, this is, 25-year-old show, but still, yeah, they were just such pieces of art on their own that I...
Which is no longer... It's no longer like a little self-contained original story. It's like it's good, but it's just more like a montage of things that happened in the first season, basically.
Yeah, the music is fantastic. Like the theme song for Superman the Animated Series is excellent. But rather than getting... like, as you say, almost a mini movie that really, and again, I said before, I could do an entire episode just on the opening credits of BTAS, that is definitely not the case with Superman the Animated Series. It's just, as you say, lots of clips from the first season. But at least we have this amazing song. So we are losing some of the artistic heights, I think, that BTAS took us to.
Certainly artistic uniqueness, because what it was doing with the title cards and the intro was super unique. I don't feel like I'd seen another show that had done that at the time. It's very, title cards are so uncommon, and it's propped up a couple times since then, but to have both of those in the same show on a children's program,
Right. And you know what? That's another thing I think that we're going to talk about a lot more as we go forward. Usually to this show's positive, I think, is that these are shows that much more know who they're aimed at than Batman the Animated Series did. We had so many "who is this show made for" conversations because it's a legit question, and we know who Superman the Animated Series and the New Adventures of Batman are made for. We know. And it's not necessarily skewing way younger, but they do a lot less experimental stuff, and they stay a lot tighter action packages, which again, for Superman, I'm going to say big bonus, especially when we get into part 1.
Wholeheartedly agree. Again, we see this shift both in the animation style and the pacing of the episodes. This is definitely for children, more clearly aimed at children. I think it's still very good for adults to watch, but it certainly is not like leaning into like hard-boiled detective stories, that are clearly like referencing classic noir films. And Superman the Animated Series definitely has references, but it's not so hard in the sack for it. It's just it's like a bonus, not a feature.
And I think that kind of takes us into discussing the design of this show, which is what we're going to do at the top of every episode of an animated discussion instead of talk about the title card. Because for a while, we are going to see a bunch of brand new, never before seen designs, both for existing characters when we get to the new Batman show, but also on this one, there's just a host of brand new characters that we get introduced to, and most of them are pretty nailed.
Oh yeah, no, these are definitive, and like while it doesn't have the airbrushed look, and it's definitely a lot more streamlined than Batman the Animated Series, the art direction and character design here is still super top notch. It holds up really well. I watched it on the 4K TV Resolution's a little low because I was watching some via DVD. But I mean, the designs are very strong, and when you look at them, they're very striking. They don't look generic. They have a very distinct visual style, and I think it's like little stuff, like the way the characters' bodies are built. I think things are more squared and boxy, for example.
Yes,
versus,
which is
BTAS.
saying something from BTAS.
Yes, and obviously the color palette is much brighter. Gotham, even on the brightest days, you'd have like the oranges and the yellows. Versus Metropolis and Superman, it's always bright and sunny. And even at night, like the whole tone is aesthetically a lot brighter and less grim and dour.
And it's interesting you say less grim and dour, because let's just talk about a bunch of these designs and kind of go in the chronological order, I think, of these episodes. We'll just kind of take them as they come, because we start on Krypton when it is in the midst of destroying itself. But we start with Jor-El, action scientist.
Yes, action. He is actually an action hero. It's kind of crazy how he's a scientist who can also wrestle with the aliens. He definitely feels like an alien or a scientist circa the 1980s, where every scientist in every movie was also an action hero.
Sure. I was thinking he's almost like a Doc Savage mold, where he is both brilliant and very physically capable, running, jumping, having car chases. And a visual thing that I really appreciated, we'll talk more about Lara in a minute, but when it comes to Jor-El and Lara, when Superman grows up, he looks exactly like Jor-El, but he has Lara's hair.
Yes. That's a really great observation, Joshua. I think they do a good job. He sounds a lot like Jor-El, but different voice actors altogether. So I do want to throw out there, in addition to the design, you have Christopher McDonald as Jor-El. Now, Christopher McDonald has done a bunch of stuff. I always immediately think of him as Shooter McGavin from Happy Gilmore, but he is
sure.
He's in tons of stuff. He's never been like an A-list movie star, but people have seen him. When they see him, they're like, "Oh, I know Christopher McDonald." He's in a ton of movies, and he has a very distinct voice. So you have him as Jor-El. Kind of lending a little bit of more celebrity talent. Again, not like movie star celebrity, but I would say bigger than your average voice actor for certain. And then, of course, you have Tim Daly cast as Superman. Very similar voices, but different.
Different enough. Yeah, absolutely. And, speaking of the voice acting, I'm going to talk more about the look of Jor-El and Lara here in a minute when we talk about the look of Krypton as a whole, because there's a lot going on there. But just with the voice acting, it's very interesting to me that Lara has an English accent, which I know there's not an England on Krypton, but the other people we hear don't, even her father. And I was just trying to figure out I don't think there's an answer to this, but I was trying to figure out what they were doing casting, this very Queen's English kind of actress surrounded by people who are just, very well-spoken Americans.
Well, do you think that is? Do you think that's to try to add that layer of royalty? Even though obviously, he's Kryptonian royalty in the sense that he is the last one, but he's not like his parents are scientists. His dad's a scientist. It's not like he's a king or anything.
Well, I will say, though, thinking about Krypton and the Science Council, that scientists on Krypton are generally portrayed as basically the societal pinnacle, really. In order for you to be in charge on Krypton, you have to be a scientist of some kind. Like, it's literally called the Science Council, So, yeah, I don't know what they were doing. Again, I don't actually think there's any explanation for it. I think they just liked that actress and didn't think about it. But it did have me for a minute thinking, oh, I wonder what that means. But then her dad talked, and I was like, it doesn't mean anything. Does it mean something that she has very lavender eyes, just like Lois, though?
Yes. No, I actually picked up on that observation as well. She does look similar enough to Lois.
Not a lot, but the eyes are a thing. Lois's eyes really stand out as part of her. That her eyes match her outfit, and she's just very lavender. And so looking at this, I was like, Lara has lavender eyes. I'm not really here for any Superman Oedipal complex discussions, but there it is. Mm-hmm. Okay, Krypton. We got to talk about Krypton because there's been a lot of Kryptons. And I have to tell you that I feel like this Krypton is a synergy of kind of my two favorite Kryptons. Like, you get the best of what I have found to be the best ones. And they're comic book ones. So you may be more or less familiar with them. But obviously there is a big Silver Age influence on all of these designs, or a lot of these designs, but especially on Krypton. Like, it looks like what the 50s thought the future would look like,
Right.
With a big dash of Kirby on there, which I think they did. Jack Kirby, Jack the King Kirby of Marvel fame and later DC. And I think that they did that on purpose because they knew that eventually they would be incorporating a lot of his characters and they wanted it all to look right together, But you take that very 50s sci-fi look and combine it with John Byrne's reboot of Superman in 1986 in Man of Steel. And what he did was he really completely did away with the Silver Age stuff. And this is when you have like a very crystalline Krypton, similar to what you had from Superman the movie. They were in full bodysuits, though, like covered from head to toe in black bodysuits with then like a tabard or a toga style thing around them, which some of that survives into these designs. And the reason Byrne did that is that he turned Krypton into a very sterile world where the people did not touch, Jor-El and Lara together had a baby that was entirely a test tube baby. Like, they were just donors. Like, nobody touched one another on this Krypton. And I'm glad that went away. I'm glad that we got a more Silver Agey Krypton, but with shades of those Byrne designs, because Byrne's design of Krypton is very, very cool and sort of legitimately alien without being completely unrecognizable.
Yeah, I definitely am seeing the Kirby vibes there, but it's not quite as when I think of Kirby designs, I think like high energy, electric, like it's a lot of bright colors.
Yeah.
A lot of like aesthetic. So I see like just enough of that to say, okay, that's familiar, but it doesn't look exactly like that. It's a lot more,
I agree,
reserved, which I actually prefer for this particular show. And it's honestly, it's a lot different than any of the cinematic Kryptons we've seen. Now,
that's true.
It's not like the 1978 Christopher Reeves or Richard Donner movie, and it's definitely, well, it comes long before the Zack Snyder movie, and that movie's a lot different as well. I haven't seen the television show Krypton, but outside of that, I think they were certainly leaning much more heavily into the comic source material than they were any of the cinematic versions.
No, I agree with that. And I also agree that it's just touches of Kirby. And one reason for that is that they really stripped down, as we've discussed a little bit, they really stripped down the designs. And Kirby's designs were always a little Baroque, And in fact, I agree with you that works for like the character designs. The place that I think it falls apart, and Krypton is a really good example of this. It's a little better example than Metropolis, I think. And I wonder if it's a little bit of the budget showing. Krypton is really sparse.
Yeah, I noticed that.
There's not a ton of detail in the backgrounds. There's not a ton of stuff around, like in the lab or whatever. I think the only furnishing that they have in their entire living room is the couch, because people sit on it, and the vase that almost falls on baby Kal-El. It's just really sparse. And so I don't love that. I don't love that part. But I think that that's because they knew they weren't going to use it very much, so only put so much effort into it. We're not going to revisit Krypton a lot, and I'm good with that.
Well, I think you're onto something there, and this again, I'm interested to see as we go through the show how the later seasons look in comparison, because it definitely feels sparse, and even Metropolis seems pretty simplified. And again, like we said, that is part of the art direction. Is everything is very basic and simplified, and I think again that definitely works for characters. But yeah, the environments. The thing about Gotham that sticks out in Batman the Animated Series is you feel it. You feel it's dirty, if it's dark. And while, Metropolis is bright and clean and all that, I don't really feel like it's as big of a character as Gotham is in Batman. And I certainly don't feel like Krypton is lived in.
It's given some personality, but it's not enough for it to like stand on its own 2 feet. We're not going to go back there 100 times, you know.
No. Well, and
if we were, it wouldn't be based on these designs flipping our lid. You know, they're good. I like them a lot, but they're not great.
Well, you know, it just reminds me of, you know, it feels like you said sparse, and it doesn't really feel lived in. Reminds me of like when you boot up a video game and you're walking around the environments and you're like, this is cool. I wish it looked like people actually lived here and did stuff here. You know?
yeah, absolutely.
So, again, because like visually it's not bad, but it just something is missing, and it doesn't have a strong sense of personality, I guess.
When it does, it really, really does, though. And there are a couple of examples there. One, I would say, is the Science Council, who I got a real, I don't know, I haven't watched a ton of this. I'm not an expert, but I got a real old school Doctor Who vibe. Like back when he used to go back to Gallifrey and have to talk with other Time Lords. And it was all, you know, basically curtain rods and wire hangers holding robes off of people, you know, to try and give them a sense of grandeur on a budget. And I wonder very seriously if they were modeling some of the costuming on Krypton that was more Baroque on old school Doctor Who stuff. Because if you go Google like mid-50s, mid-60s Time Lords, I think you're going to get a Krypton Science Council vibe from them.
I definitely get the weird, spooky sci-fi council. Maybe something like The Prisoner. You ever see that? The 1970s show? A little bit of that. Not quite as... That one's a little more future tech, like with the shiny stuff. But the council is and the image of like a bunch of people sitting around a table talking up high, in a high area. I don't know. It definitely has that like to your point, that 1970s, early 80s sci-fi vibe to it, and I do appreciate that quite a bit. And I will say, to segue a little, maybe to do the segue. The strongest thing about the Krypton design, in my opinion, is Brainiac, and the way that they have incorporated Brainiac throughout their entire society. He's everywhere. It's like you're being watched by Big Brother, but Big Brother is Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it's eerie. His presence is eerie, and I know we have that baggage because we know who Brainiac is, but just the fact that his symbol, it's like his eyes are everywhere, and I felt like his presence was loomed over the entire planet as far as we could tell.
Yeah, no, I think we're supposed to be disturbed by Brainiac. I think we're supposed to be disturbed by the fact that Krypton as a whole is so cool with Brainiac. You know, we're not going to spend a lot of time on Krypton, but traditionally, Kryptonians are jerks, like real big jerks who have weird ways of doing things that Earthlings look at and go, that's really like merciless and compassionless. Why are you such jerks? You know, and we don't get that as much because we don't spend a lot of time there, but Brainiac does all that heavy lifting for us.
Yes. Yeah, most definitely. Well, and I mean, to your point, it highlights, it really helps us get behind Jor-El, who himself is a little rough around the edges, but,
action scientist.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But I mean, like the rest, you're right. The rest of Krypton look like kind of like, jerks, a-holes. So, because we're not going to swear on the show, but a-holes, you know, they're all like in disbelief, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but it definitely makes you feel like a climate change deniers sort of thing, and you're like, come on.
Oh man, if I could go back in time to every conversation that I had with people about how there's no way they wouldn't believe they were destroying their planet. Oh, son.
Yep.
Behold the year of our Lord 2019.
Yep.
But, and one last thing for Brainiac that I really, really loved about his presence is that even when he is relatively small, he's still bigger than all the humans. Like he towers over, and especially in the Science Council, because the Science Council is above Jor-El, and Brainiac's symbol, like the representation of his presence there, is even higher than them. And because I had Kirby on the brain, it gave me shades of the Kree Supreme Intelligence, which I am not going to go into detail on now, but friends, Google that. It's a giant face in a Jell-O jar. And it's not Brainiac, but I think you'll see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, no, I'm following. And it, I don't know. Brainiac, we're going to get to Brainiac far more down the road.
Oh, there's a lot. Yes, there's so much.
Let's move on to the Earthlings now that we have talked about all the Kryptonians.
Shifting to Earth, we have an introduction to Ma and Pa Kent, looking much younger than they will in the rest of the show. And I thought they did an amazing job with this. I believed that the older versions of Ma and Pa were the older versions of these people we saw.
Oh yeah,
totally. The continuity is very good there. That they're recognizable, but also clearly 20 years have passed, or more. I liked and I really liked their design where they land in their older age, because we are going to see them a lot and they're always going to be a presence in Clark's life. And they did a great job making them like really solid, good, sort of salt of the earth folks at a glance.
Yes, absolutely. I don't have a whole lot to say about them other than that I feel like, when you think of the iconic Ma and Pa Kent, although they have to look down. That's all I got there.
Yes.
I have more to say about Ma and Pa Kent, but that's definitely more in the kind of analysis of the episode piece.
Absolutely.
Design is solid.
Unfortunately, the other two people that we focus on in Smallville are criminally under-designed. Young Lana and young Clark are not great.
Hey man, listen, they knew they were only going to spend 10 minutes with those. Not even that. Not only that. It's 7 minutes with those characters, so they're just like, people aren't going to notice. Let's just breeze on past it.
I think you're right. And I think the only reason we get a young Lana Lang is because they knew they were going to bring her in the present into the show later. I mean,
right.
But yeah, they don't even get as good a design as some of the background people. Like Pete Ross with his leather jacket and stuff gets a better design than Clark Kent does with his white t-shirt and blue jeans. Your red shoes aren't even enough, Clark. They're not enough. That's not a personality.
He looks like about as interesting as a loaf of white bread.
Yeah. But which I agree with you is probably because they weren't going to spend much time there. It's the Krypton problem writ even smaller,
Yeah. But what about Metropolis? 20 years later, or 10 years later, I guess, rather.
Almost everybody in Metropolis is so good. Almost everybody.
Good. Yep, I'd agree. I would agree, starting with, of course, Lois Lane. This is like iconic. She's so good. Her design's so good. She's like iconic Lois Lane. When I think of Lois Lane, this is who I think of. She's got that, like you said, the purple lavender outfit, the striking eyes, the skirt. Yeah. The give 'em hell attitude. All of it is iconic Lois Lane.
And played by Dana Delaney to perfection.
Yes.
Like both the look and the delivery really solidify this Lois as both sexy and professional. Like we really get all of her personality here, even up to her overconfidence. Like it comes right across. She's so competent that she's not even completely sure when her confidence should run out, And I like that. Now, do you think that there is anything to all of the various shades of purple on her? Or do you think that was just a color choice so she would look good standing next to Superman and Clark?
I hadn't thought about it. I assumed it was an aesthetic choice. They wanted to diversify the color palette, and the purple's different.
Well, and traditionally, villains wear purple and green, and yellow, and the reason that they do is because those are complementary colors, like on the color wheel. So you already have all your heroes in your blues and reds, typically, right? And so that's what I thought. I wondered if there was something more to it, or if it was just purely let's make sure she stands out when she's next to the two characters she's going to stand next to most of the time.
I think there's some layer, if you really want to read into it. There's some complexity to Lois Lane. She's sharp, pointed, feisty, maybe a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe if you're really wanting to just dive into, she's not obviously not villainous, but maybe she's not quite as straight-laced as, Superman.
Oh, that's not bad. I like that a lot, because it isn't a hard purple. It's a lot of periwinkles and lavenders. I like that a lot. Lois being a little shady, I'm fine with that. I'm with that.
I think it's on brand. Perry White.
He's perfect.
He is. Exactly. Is everything I ever wanted in a Perry White. He's angry. He's yelling. He's pushing his people to go out and get the best news stories. What more could you? It's like J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. It's like you couldn't ask for a better version.
Right. He's obviously much older, they even with the streamlined lines, they give him a little bit of a pot belly. His hairline is receding, but that voice acting is so good. He can actually yell really well and also be super sarcastic, and it all works. I really like this Perry White.
Yeah, I think so. And of course that takes us to Clark Kent Superman.
Well, we got to talk about these fellows separately.
Yeah, we do, because I like both of them. We'll start with Clark Kent. I love the big boxy build that he's got going on. Very broad-chested, huge. He's big. How do people not suspect he's Superman? But he's got
that's why I feel like that design works so well for Superman, but it's not great for Clark, And I'm not too worried about the whole secret identity thing, because even before he starts flying, that's one of the bigger, suspensions of disbelief. But I will say, not everything, I'm kind of calming myself down here, because not everything can be All-Star Superman, which managed to show me a Clark Kent that was clearly as big as Superman, but put him in baggy clothes and had him kind of like hunch his shoulders, so he looked like a big corn-fed guy instead of Superman,
Right.
I can't expect that level of detail from the show, so I've decided to let it go. But I did, because I was thinking real hard about it, I was like, yeah, that body shape just does not do Clark Kent any favors.
Well, and I mean, again, secret identity, superhero shenanigans are always a thing historically, and especially at this time. We hadn't reached the Iron Man years where Marvel started throwing that out the window. But in Superman especially, that's one of the hardest ones to wrap your head around. I think there's something there. But I just think it's so funny how there is documented news stories in Smallville about a guardian angel. And then, of course, Clark Kent is introduced as from Smallville. He's called Smallville by Lois. And there's not the remote. I mean, I know that's kind of part of the premise, but that is just part of the inherent suspension of disbelief you buy into when you're engaging with a Superman story. But
Trust me, you don't have to suspend your disbelief as hard if you just have my All-Star Superman example in mind. But again, that's kind of as good as it ever gets. So
yeah, well, and I think this version of Superman especially, they don't really. I mean, he's not as confident as Superman, but he's just quieter. Really, I don't really feel like
true.
His personality is not so different that because I know that's kind of part of the idea, right? Like, oh, I can't believe he's Superman because Clark Kent's such a goofy, awkward dude, even if he looks similar,
Yep.
So
yeah.
I don't get that vibe from this particular Superman.
Nah, they don't mess with that at all. They don't change his voice at all, which I think is kind of a mistake. And we'll get to this when we get to the Batman show. They stopped doing a Bruce Wayne voice too. Yep. So this is a mistake. They should have different voices, at least a little. I mean, again, going back to the history of Superman, the most iconic stuff is like when he was on the radio, that they had to get somebody who could do a Clark Kent voice, and in mid-sentence, this looks like a job for Superman, and really sell it. And they don't even try here, and I feel like they should have tried a little.
Well, at least a little bit. I don't know.
On the visual side, this is another big nod to Silver Age Superman, actually. His blue suit, white shirt, red tie is the uniform of Silver Age Clark Kent. He never appeared in anything else.
I love it. I actually like the outfit.
They actually had an explanation for that in the comics, that Superman would treat his Clark Kent clothing with chemicals so that when he had to run real fast to change, they didn't just burst into flame.
Oh, that's funny.
It's pretty good.
Oh, wow, that's funny. I do love the Superman design, though.
It's perfect.
It's his iconic Superman. He's big, he's boxy, he's confident. The colors are like the right amount of contrast. I don't know. Everything about this design says Superman. And I know eventually they make him even bigger in Justice League, but for now, I feel pretty good with where we're at with Superman.
Well, at that point, you have to have some contrast between him and, the Flash or Green Lantern, who are physically powerful, but we need to see, more from Superman,
Right.
But yeah, right here, it's great. I mean, he's clearly a big dude. The classic suit is the best suit. And I even like that they make the shorts kind of metallic so that they stand out against the cape.
Yes. Yeah, no, wholeheartedly agreed. I like the way the cape flaps. I love the little S logo on the cape. It's all money.
I like the length of the cape because way too often everybody makes the cape go all the way to the ground. That is not right. That is a Batman move, not a Superman move.
Correct. It should go down to his his upper ankles at the lowest.
I say to you, at the lowest, it should go mid-thigh.
Oh, mid-thigh? Ooh, even. Okay, all right.
I have an actual in-fiction reason for this.
Is it because no capes, according to The Incredibles?
No, because that's bullshit. What actually is the deal is that's Kryptonian fashion in a lot of the iterations of his costume is what Kryptonians wore to a certain extent. And if you actually are going to wear a cloak all the time that's just there for fashion, it's not going to go all the way to the floor. You have to sit down. You have to get in and out of vehicles. Anyway, I approve. It should not be flowing around like Batman's cape. It should be like mid-thigh. So this is good. This is very good Superman business.
I agree. Sorry, I jumped up. I apologize, Joshua. I ran the Superman and Clark Kent together, but we have to get to your favorite character design before we get much further. Like the best one, right?
Yeah, you mean the only one that I really, really hate?
What are you talking about, Joshua? I thought Jimmy was your buddy. I thought he was your pal. I mean,
Jimmy is legit one of my top 10 best characters in superhero comics of all time, bar none. And in this show, he is garbage. His design is crap. His acting is crap. They never give him anything to do. It's bad. I am actively angry at what they do to Jimmy Olsen in this show. And it starts with, here's Archie Andrews, basically. It's not good. I don't like it.
It feels like they were trying to modernize Jimmy, and I think it faltered big time.
Yeah, it just doesn't work out. And to be fair, this show's not going to do anything with him. Not really. And so it's fine. But since I love Jimmy Olsen, it's disappointing.
I think he's pretty forgettable, honestly. In fact, I often forget about Jimmy Olsen in this show.
I know, which is not a thing that should happen to Superman's pal. Like, he's as big a deal to Superman as Lois.
Yep.
But not here. Not here.
So you and I are going to have and this might be more in the episode conversation, but Lex Luthor, what do you think?
Okay, so a little bit of comic book background to explain where I wind up coming from, right? So it was the mid-'80s, during John Byrne's reboot of Superman, that Lex Luthor stopped being the greatest criminal mind of the century and instead became a ruthless, crappy, big lights, big city businessman. This is not a great shift. And I think that, and I mean that for like comic books, like for the character, like for the mythos, it's not great. It's very 1986. And a lot of this show does go to the John Byrne well. So I'm not surprised that this is what we got. And clearly they wanted him, well, again, this is more analysis of the show, but they wanted him to be more of a, puppet master, which I also understand. But the choice to make him basically an evil businessman, which feels a little redundant, frankly, is not the greatest choice. But once we get past the fact that that's not the greatest choice, this design is so good.
It's great. It's fantastic. It's
so good. And Clancy Brown is amazing as Lex.
He's incredible as Lex. He was probably my favorite Lex Luthor, he's up there as my up there tied.
That's
favorite.
legit.
He's incredible. Like whenever I read the comics, that's the voice I hear in my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
it's not even a competition. So we'll get more into the episode. I actually really like big business puppet master Lex Luthor. I like that eventually we get to the Lex Luthor that you prefer and the Justice League stuff. I think it's cool because we get to see as much a progression for Lex as we do for some of the other characters throughout the DCAU.
True. That's true. I can't argue with that. And that's pretty cool. But the thing is, and I know it's death of the author and we should look at the text as the text, but, looking at this design, they didn't have any of that in mind, at that time.
Oh, no.
And so
no.
I'm left here going, well, I didn't like it in 1986 and I don't like it in 1996 either.
Yeah, no, I feel you, and obviously they had no idea that they were going to do the JLA. I mean, maybe they were dreaming, but I don't think they actually were planning for it at all. So I think that's what happens. And but to start out, I do like that we start with Businessman Lex. I like Businessman Lex for different reasons than I like Supervillain Lex or Criminal Mastermind Lex. And I do think even as a businessman, he is very conniving and criminal mastermind-esque. As well, I think as we'll see. But it's just he's not on the field fighting Superman. He's pulling the strings and basically creates most of Superman's rogues gallery. Which again, as a choice, I appreciate that. I see where you're coming from, but
we do dodge the Wayne Enterprises problem of another fine criminal created by Wayne Enterprises with LexCorp. It's true
because Lex is actually a bad guy, so
it's okay. He's doing it on purpose. Yeah.
So I don't know. That'll be I foresee that being an ongoing conversation for us throughout the show because I don't know, something about like really. Criminal mastermind, rich dude with unlimited resources who's thinking 5 steps ahead all the time. I love that stuff. I love it.
No, now, again, I don't love it, but part of the reason I don't love it is because it doesn't give Superman problems that Superman can solve, which is kind of a bigger narrative issue. Superman cannot win against Lex Luthor ever when he's Businessman Lex. He can stop him, but he can't win. And I never want to be in a position where I stop and go, if Batman had come to town for a week, Lex would be in a lot of trouble because Batman would actually build a case. But we'll talk about that in our next episode.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, we got some also-rans, though, that are worth talking about. John Corbin is good. I like John Corbin a lot.
Yes.
He looks like James Coburn, but does not sound like James Coburn at all.
No, that's because he's voiced by freaking Malcolm McDowell.
I know.
That is such a... I can't believe they got him to do a voice on this show, I'll be honest. It's kind of amazing.
I agree. And we're not going to fully spoil everything, but I'll say right now, the reason John Corbin got some love is we're going to see him again. Like any Superman nerds listening to this already know where we're headed, even if they haven't seen this show, because they know the name. But so he gets a really good design because he's going to get an even better design later.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And again, testament to how well this show, like Batman the Animated Series in a lot of ways, is very good at planting seeds for things to come. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they had a plan here.
We got a couple of townies here, mostly Bibbo.
Were you familiar with Bibbo?
I mean, from the show, that's about it.
Yeah, he's also a refugee from the mid-'80s Superman reboot, where they actually brought back a supporting cast for like at the planet, but also in Metropolis as a whole. And Bibbo was like their eyes on the street. Right. He was actually good and useful in the comic book, so I don't know why he turned into comedy relief here. I don't know, but he's fine. Popeye, but dumber. It's fine.
I just kind of ask why, but it's whatever. What's cooler though? Everyone, actually, I got nothing. The rest of the designs we're going to talk about today kind of suck. We got Metropolis, which we've actually already talked about. I feel like.
Well, I want to say I like Metropolis, and I think that it's a lot less spare than Krypton winds up being because we're going to spend more time there. But it does, I think your phrase of it doesn't feel lived in is just right. It does look like the city of tomorrow, which is a thing we want it to do. Right. The skyline is great. The Daily Planet is prominent. The biggest problem that I think I'm going to have with Metropolis is actually the fact that it doesn't look different enough than the new Gotham City. But again, we'll talk about that when we get to Batman. But that flattening out of the lighting, it looks like a different city, but it doesn't look enough. It's not lived in. You nailed it. That phrase just does it for me. So I do like it, but it has some of the same problems as Krypton.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So Metropolis, I'm middle of the road. You're a little more positive. But let's talk about this Kryptonian rocket, because this thing is boring.
All of the technology in this show really got short shrift in these first 3 episodes because the Kryptonian rocket is dishwater dull. It's not great. It's in fact, it doesn't even really seem to fit with the rest of Krypton.
Nope.
And the reason that I hate that is we're going to see it a lot. Yep. Like it shows up a lot in this show. And it's so boring.
It's a throwaway design. Literally every other design, from Smallville to Zack Snyder's Superman to or Man of Steel rather, to the Christopher Reeves movie, to you name it. It's got a better Kryptonian rocket.
It's 100%. Yeah, it's true. And the Lex suit is our other piece of technology, which I feel suffers from some of the same problem, but I'm not as upset about it because we're never going to see it again.
That's fair. It's not great.
Its movement is actually very good, and a lot of the weapons are very cool, but the actual look of it is like, seriously, olive drab? I mean, does no one at LexCorp have any imagination when it comes to paint? I don't understand it.
I don't know. It feels like generic 90s mech, and like so generic. I'm just going to say it, Joshua. I actually had the thought, this is a very bad thing. In fact, when it showed up, I was like, well, there's the thing Superman's going to have to fight, and it looks like a first thing Superman's going to have to fight.
Yeah. It actually looks a lot like the Mandroid armor, but bigger, which is a 70s Marvel reference, which should tell you everything I feel about this design. Like, it was not the freshest thing when it was a Mandroid armor in 1975. So, but we're never going to see it again, so it's fine.
Yeah, so I think, Joshua, that kind of covers all the... And I know we spent a lot of time on the designs this week, and obviously it's not going to be this way on every episode, but I think talking about designs is a good way to start the show, especially since moving forward there's going to be fewer of them per episode.
True.
And, I think it's good for listeners. I hope listeners agree and appreciate us kind of laying our feelings about the overall change in art direction, because I think both you and I agree that it's a good art direction, but we were coming from BTAS, so it's definitely a change in you have to change your expectations for what you're going to get moving forward.
Not talking about the aesthetic for this podcast would be ridiculous. So it is a little heavy in this episode, but good news, friends, we're moving into discussing the actual show.
All right. So 45 minutes in, we are talking about part 1 of Last Son of Krypton. So basically, just to give you guys, if you aren't familiar or you haven't watched this in a long time, part 1 is all Krypton. In fact, it feels less like the same episode and more like a prologue.
Very fair.
Whereas part 2 and 3 feel much more like the first adventure featuring Superman. So you've got part 1 is Krypton, prologue to Superman the animated series, and you got part 2 and 3 that feel like a 2-part here's Superman story.
Yeah.
I mean, you guys know what it is. All right, he grows up, he's Smallville, and then he goes to Metropolis and fights something that Lex builds. So there you go. Joshua, I love the Krypton stuff, I'll be honest. I mean, from a story perspective at least. Aesthetically, it's whatever, but I love
it's good but not great. It's good but not great on the aesthetic, and I would actually say the same for its narrative purpose. But you really like it, so I'm going to shut up and let you gush all about Krypton.
Okay, love's a strong word. I just found it more interesting than I expected. I love the politics. I love that they turned Jor-El into basically a glorified doomsday prepper, except for he's a scientist, so he's actually got data to back up
and he's right.
And he's right. Well, and I just in the year, as you mentioned earlier, in the year 2019, it feels really sad.
Prescient.
Yeah.
Prescient.
Like,
yes,
hey, this world's burning. We're in the last days. Krypton. Sorry, a guy coming in saying, "Hey, we're in the last days. I have infinite amount, basically all the information you could ever need to prove it." And everyone's like, but this machine, we trust it more than you. And
let's ask our terrifying artificial intelligence overlord. What do you think, terrifying artificial intelligence overlord? Nah, you're fine.
You're all fine. You're good. Yeah. So I love that vibe. It's like an apocalyptic story on a different planet. So it feels different and fresh. And I don't know. Man of Steel, is not a great movie. I love certain things about it, other things I hate. But I will say more than other people, likes the Krypton stuff, and I don't know what it is. I feel the same way about this. I'm like, yeah, this deserved a full episode. And I I just think it's an interesting story, and it does add some context for the sacrifice of Jor-El and Laura, and also kind of paints a picture of who Kryptonians really were. Because that's the thing, Superman spends so much time wondering about his heritage, and well, we actually get to see it wasn't that great after all.
So that actually speaks to my biggest issue with an entire 22 minutes of Krypton, is that almost every time you're focusing on Krypton, you're missing the point of Superman. But in the case of this particular episode, they do some, as we mentioned, really clever things with Brainiac that I like very much. And they sow the seeds for kryptonite as young Kal-El is escaping, and between that and them avoiding something else that a bunch of stuff does, I'm going to declare it adequate excuse for having 22 minutes of Krypton.
Okay.
If it were a second longer, it'd be too much.
I think that's fair. I don't know if I'd want to spend another episode on Krypton. I'll say that much. I feel like I have just the right amount. Because as we'll talk about as the series continues on, to your point, there are a lot of references back to Krypton. And also the way that Brainiac is integrated makes him a more dynamic villain to Superman. And it adds a certain layer of, I don't know, it builds in the tension. Oh, you basically let my planet die,
Right. And he's very specifically an antagonist to Jor-El.
Oh, yeah.
So becoming an antagonist to Superman gives a certain continuity to that character and their enmity that he did not have back in the day when Brainiac was just a really, really smart guy from a planet of really, really smart guys.
Yes. Yep. Correct. Things we didn't touch on as much that I think other iterations of Superman cover more in the origin story is the Phantom Zone. It does get referenced here, but I don't know. I feel like it's drummed up a lot more, and it's probably because like Zod, for example, is in the Christopher Reeve and Zack Snyder movie, so you kind of feel like you have a sense of what is the Phantom Zone, and versus here they do give it a shout out. I think they do a really good job, actually, for, like, fans of Superman in general. There's a lot of Easter eggs and, like, little line drops here and there, and that's one of them. Where, it is a thing that exists, but we're not really going to go into that at all right now.
Well, if I remember correctly, there's at least one episode where some people come out of the Phantom Zone and are a problem. So I really like, first of all, how Silver Agey it is that they put it in here. And I really like that they're building themselves a story engine, right? This is a big deal for superhero comics that just have to come out month in, month out. It's why you have supporting casts, and it's why you have love triangle between two people, is because anytime you need to go to the story well, it's like, what are we going to do? Pull somebody out of the Phantom Zone. I don't want to see that every episode, but it's good to have in your back pocket.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, no, you are correct. Without getting spoilery, there are characters who do come out of the Phantom Zone. So it's not that it never gets utilized, but it seems like in other iterations, they drum it up a lot more. But totally. Yes, it does, in fact, come back around later down the road.
Well, in the Silver Age, it was basically treated like Krypton's attic for story purposes. So yeah, it's definitely been overused, but here, just right. And I think we're going to put it to use in good, smart ways going forward. So high five for Silver Agey goodness.
Good job, Silver Agey goodness. So what did you make? Did you like the way Krypton was destroyed? Did you like the kind of climate change denial angle, which I don't know if was intentional at the time, but it feels very apt in 2019. Did you like kind of like, let's say, I guess Laura's dad, Solvan, kind of being an opposition to, or was that kind of, did you feel like that was boring?
Well, again, we have to actually make this 22 minutes justify itself for more than just story seeds for the future. And so I kind of decided to start looking for all of the silver linings, right? And Solvan is actually kind of a silver lining. I really like that Jor-El, when he feels it's the right thing to do, is prepared to break rules. That's very Superman. But he's also actually inspirational. Given a moment to hear his passion and look at his data, his oppositional father-in-law comes around to his way of thinking. And actually, I mean, the planet's blowing up, but still, he throws himself to the cops so that Jor-El and Lara can save Kal-El. I love that because it really shows me some Superman stuff, like breaking rules for the greater good and being inspirational. Kind of big deals for Superman, so it was cool to see him in Jor-El.
I agree. Oh, by the way, fun fact, Sylvan was voiced by Tony Jay, which, by the way, might be if he sounds familiar to listeners, he's the guy also voiced Frollo and the Hunchback of Notre Dame. You ever have that when you're watching it and you're like, I know that voice. Where have I heard it
all
before?
The time now.
Yeah.
All the time. Yeah.
So that's just, again, nice little tidbit for listeners there. But I don't know, Joshua. I think I don't have much more to say on Krypton, about Krypton, other than I really appreciate the Brainiac angle. I love how he basically jettisons himself from the planet moments before it implodes.
Yeah.
I mean, just makes him that much more evil. Like, he waited until the last second. And then just the eeriness of, oh no, it's happening again. And Zolo says, no, this is the last one.
That line, not another one, the last one. Oh my gosh, that was very good. I do have one big thing from Krypton that's actually missing, and I approve of the fact that it's missing because I hate it every time it shows up anywhere else, and it shows up a lot. And the reason it shows up a lot is Richard Donner. It's one of the small handful of missteps from Superman the movie. The thing that is missing is any kind of BS Messiah complex that Jor-El and Lara have for Kal-El.
Oh, sure. Okay.
They just want to save their baby. So they put him in a rocket and they shoot him to a planet where he will be basically indestructible. There is no discussion of he will show them how to be better. He will be an inspiration. Kryptonians are jerks. They don't think that way. The closest they would get to is he will colonize them and turn them into a new Krypton. So you see this Messiah complex, these Christological imagery that just gets slopped all over Superman, not usually to his bonus, and I hate it the most when it starts on Krypton. So thank you, guys, who made this show, for just making Jor-El and Lara concerned parents.
Okay, well, I do like what you're saying there. So Richard Donner was really the one who brought that into the fold?
Yeah, that had not been around before, as far as I know. I mean, looking at all the comic book stuff with Krypton, you basically just had a desperate scientist shooting his son to another planet to save his life. And when you did dwell on Krypton in the comics, it was always like Superman got to go back in time and visit his parents. It was always relationship drama. They certainly didn't. Also, by the way, until relatively recently, I mean, Superman's been around for 90 years. So until relatively recently, it was mostly Jewish people that worked on him and that definitely created him. They weren't going to do Jesus Christ Superman. He's got a lot more in common with Moses and the judges of the Old Testament than he does with Jesus Christ until relatively recently in his history. So no, that's all Richard Donner and Marlon Brando. And I'm glad it's not here because it keeps showing up after that, and it's bad. It's terrible. It undermines how bad Krypton is, like as a culture, and it also puts all this like additional weight on Superman that's not necessary. Just let him have parents who wanted to save his life.
Firstly, I find that interesting because I didn't realize that Richard Donner. I knew that wasn't OG Superman origin, but I didn't realize Richard Donner was the one who started peddling that. And I mean, like, that's become such an accepted part of the mythos that it's like, for a lot of people, I think that's pretty essential to the character. That's interesting. I mean, if you look at, I would say, any version of Superman since the Richard Donner movies, the Christ symbology is all over it. Now, of course, it's interesting because, like, as you say, written by Jewish writers. I don't know. That's some interesting history there. So I appreciate you enlightening me, and hopefully the listeners as well. I don't know. I can give or take on the Messiah stuff. I don't hate it as much as you, but it's in some ways. You tell me that. You tell me what you think about this. In some ways, I feel like it makes Jor-El a worse person by feeding his son this like weird propaganda about how he's gonna be a Messiah or something. I don't know.
No, that's also true. That is also true. It's not good. It's not great. I'm glad that it didn't make it into here. That also didn't make it into the John Byrne reboot in '86, which again, they're pulling, some percentage of this from. Because Kryptonians are bad people. They're not good people. Like the fact that Jor-El gives a damn about anybody makes him weird. And it always has. So this idea of he's going to go and show them how to be better. He might go and show them how to be more Kryptonian. That might be what you mean, but nobody but you is going to think that's better.
Oof, boy. That's interesting. Okay, cool. Well, I don't know how I feel about that. Because I don't know. Yeah, it's my understanding of Superman has been so tied up in the Richard Donner stuff. Now, I do think it's very presumptuous to say I'm gonna show them the way. I don't know. Yeah, that's not great Superman.
It's very Kryptonian, but not in the altruistic, compassionate way that we usually
No. It's
that.
like the super it's the super narcissistic way where you're like, of course our way is better than their way. We'll show them. We're civilized. That's actually, you could argue, it's a form of like imperialism. So not becoming of Superman.
Yeah.
Which,
yes.
Well, that's a whole nother side tangent, but there are definitely parallels between that and modern day evangelical Christianity. But hey, different podcast for that. Let's keep going.
So moving to Smallville briefly, the stuff I like here, I like that they do a real kind of slow burn on his powers, and that there is a learning curve that progresses into Metropolis.
Well, yeah, because even when he gets to Metropolis, he's still figuring stuff out. Like, he's still testing his strength.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious that they did the entire 10-season show, Smallville, in less than 10 minutes. So that was fun. Yeah, I mean,
well, yeah.
So I like the flirtatious nature he has with Lana. I feel like that's good. And even though obviously they weren't going to dwell on that, and that's not the real romantic angle, I like that they play that up while it's a thing.
We know everything we need to know there, which is Lana is way more into him than he is into her. And now we know everything we need to know about that dynamic. It's pretty economic storytelling.
Yep. Yeah. Wholeheartedly agree. Yeah. I think the other big one here is Ma and Pa Kent. Again, just being good parents, not like lecturing their kids about destiny or moral values or stuff. They're just good, decent people, right?
Yes. And that read on them also sets up a thing I really like about young Clark, which is he has exactly the right amount of angst.
Yeah, well, he's anxious, I would say. He's worried. He feels out of place. Kind of is worried about being a freak, sort of thing. Yeah, I like it, but not so much though.
But then the minute he figures out he can fly, it's actually like, okay, wait, my life might actually be pretty cool after all. Like that, I get it. You're shocked to discover you're not from Earth, like it's the shock of being told you're adopted times 100. I get it. And then he's upset and he runs away and he breaks a couple of things. But the minute you start flying, if you are not a person who goes, okay, this is actually pretty good, that's the right reaction. It's the right reaction. I don't want to see any more Superman as ultimate outsider stories, because he's not. He isn't. He's the perfect immigrant story where the immigrant shows up from someplace else, is assimilated into the new culture, but then also elevates that culture.
Right. Because he contributes his Kryptonian heritage to the larger culture as a whole. Yeah, no, I agree. And I love, what did you make of him finding out his heritage via like a space projection? So not only is, hey, Mom and Pa Kent, we're not your parents, but also here's your real parents. They're space parents and they're dead, telling you about who you are. I just found I thought his reaction where he could, like, he was freaking out and his he had the thing, the little beam was on his head and he was in the vision, but his parents were just watching him like freak out and they're like, do you think we should stop? Nah, he's gonna figure it out. I found that quite funny.
I really liked that. I think I saw a lot of Ma and Pa in that moment. Like, Ma says it's hurting him, and it is, but it's hurting him emotionally. But she's saying it's hurting him like we should stop it. Like, she's almost pretending it's physical. And Pa's like, listen, the kid, whatever this is, it's information he needs. I really like that as a way for him to find out, because it means he can't disbelieve it. You know what I mean? Like, I want him to find out he's Kryptonian in a way that makes him go, okay, I have to accept that, but it's not really who I am. Like, it's part of me, but it's not all of me. Let's move on. I don't want him to like live in a will they, won't they sort of, am I from Earth or am I not situation.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think the sequence where he flies is, I actually think most versions of Superman get that right, but this one feels especially good. I mean, like you said, you realize life's actually not that bad. But also that it just symbolizes the hope of Superman so effectively.
Yeah, yes.
And this is Clark kind of discovering that hope within himself for the first time, and seeing him have that like realization as he's flying is like, as a fan of Superman and the character and what he represents, you're just like, yeah, that's amazing. I feel good that he feels that way. I don't know. It's just
he is literally rising above.
Yes, yeah, rising above sad truths of the earth. Yes.
So last thing from Smallville before we move on to Metropolis, I kind of appreciate that the Superman emblem is Kryptonian, because while it does look like an S, it doesn't look that much like an S anymore. Like the day that Superman appeared on the cover in 1939 of Action Comics, it was an S, like in a triangle. And now it's so stylized. I like when it is a Kryptonian symbol. I like it especially when it is a symbol of his own house.
Yes. No, I agree. I think that's a very smart aesthetic. Another great artistic choice by the animators. And I don't know, and maybe you could fill me in here with some comics history with Superman. Is this something that started about this time, or had it been done a lot previous to this? Because I know we've seen it quite a bit since Superman the Animated Series, but I just want to get your take.
I think that the first time we see that as an actual Kryptonian symbol is, again, Richard Donner. I'm not going to swear to that, but if you recall the beginning of Superman the movie, you have Marlon Brando's Jor-El walking around in the silver outfit with the black S shield, on his chest. Whereas most of the comic book representations had Jor-El with like a sunburst symbol on his chest, again, because it was just 50s sci-fi stuff.
Right.
So I think that starts with Richard Donner. I'm not 100% on that. I really like it when it's Kryptonian, though, so I was behind that. There is a good conversation to be had, not now, but just in general, about whether it's better if it symbolizes Krypton as a whole or the House of El. And it's pretty obviously supposed to be House of El here, but there's an actual ongoing conversation about that I will not bore all of our listeners with, because we still have lots more episode to go. But it's an interesting conversation, and I would love to hear from you listeners what you think.
Yeah, I think that's a good choice. Does it represent the House of El? Does it represent Kryptonian heritage as a whole? I do like, though, going back to your immigrant narrative idea that you mentioned earlier, that this is someone who is proud of their heritage, so proud they wear it on their chest like a badge of honor. And it represents something hopeful for everybody. And he is not trying to hide his identity or hide where he's from, but take ownership of it. And again, as you say, showcase the parts of the Kryptonian heritage that can make everybody's lives better. And I think that's really great. And I agree wholeheartedly that it being a symbol and not an S is the way to go. So we move on into Metropolis, which is where this episode really starts to pick up steam. We see Lois. Clark arrives at the Daily Planet. Lois is working the Daily Planet. They're kind of like digging into what is Lex up to, who's this little savior, who's a guardian angel type character. I just think it's a great way to set it up. I love that Lois Lane is the one who dubs the term Superman because of the S symbol on his chest. But it's not an S, but it looks like an S. S for Superman. I think it's great.
I like it.
It's on brand for Lois. And of course, she would be the one to come up with it so quickly. So I approve.
I also kind of think Nietzsche is a weird pull for the kids show, but okay. I mean,
yeah,
she could just say Superman because he's doing impossible things, but okay.
Hey man, Nietzsche. We're in the 90s, right? People love Nietzsche in the 90s. It's very appropriate for the time.
But I agree with you about all of the introductions and the relationships that get set up right away. I love how hard-charging Lois is, and I love that she kind of makes a small fool of herself in front of Clark, but recovers instantly and just breezes past that, turns him into Smallville, tricks him and leaves him behind. She's not nice. She's a cutthroat journalist. She gets the scoop by going and getting the scoop, But Clark's not a milquetoast.
Right.
He gets there. He does the job. They quickly come to respect one another. And I really like all of that so fast.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I actually like that Lois is really just looking out for number one. I mean, this is kind of why I like her, too. Because there's the whole sequence where they're investigating the LexCorp thing later. after they have their talk with LexCorp and Lex, and Clark's throwing him some hard balls about his machine being stolen. But I love that basically Lois takes all this information, is like, great idea. I'm going to go now before you can scoop me with the information I just got from you. Right.
Yes.
So I think, she is, she's not like a bad, super selfish character, but she's a career woman who knows what she wants, and she's not about making friends. She's just about getting the job done, which I think is pretty great.
There's a whole subtext about a woman in the workplace, especially a predominantly male workplace, that we could backfill with Lois, that we don't need it, we get it, but it's all right here in all of these interactions. But she really does come to respect Clark Kent as a reporter.
Yes.
And that's also, I feel, really important to their dynamic. They have to respect one another as colleagues for us to believe kind of everything else that spins out of their relationship,
Yeah, and again, I think that's where Lex kind of comes into the fold, because he is the foil that gives Clark the opportunity. He's not afraid to interrogate or ask the hard questions. And Lois respects that, picks up on it. It's a great way to develop a shorthand between all three of your core characters.
Also, I kind of have to jump to the end to contrast this a little bit, so we're jumping around a bit, but look at how he confronts Lex as Clark, who is there as a truth teller and a fact finder,
right,
versus how he confronts Lex at the end as Superman, which is never mean or overbearing, but is clearly meant to be intimidating and is intimidating.
Yes.
And you just look, these are both parts of the same man. He's not like doing some weird double personality stuff. It's just he comes at the exact same problem in different ways, depending on if he's Clark or Superman.
Right.
And again, you kind of have to talk about the relationship of all these characters in terms of Clark's relationship with Superman and vice versa too.
Yeah.
And we get all of it here.
Yeah, and I think it has a lot of parallels to Bruce Wayne trying to solve the crime problem in Gotham differently than Batman, but they're both working towards the same goal. And Superman and Clark Kent are very similar in the same way. I like how you look at Clark as the truth seeker, the truth teller, who and Superman's kind of the one who executes that. Like, okay, I discovered this terrible truth. What can I do to make it better? What can I do to...
what do I do about it? How do I stop it? Yeah, absolutely. And both are vitally important, I think, to who he is and to kind of our vision, of him.
And again, I think I love that. I love, and again, just going back to how quickly these character dynamics are communicated, and you immediately get it and you buy it. Like Clark and Lois go interview Lex in a minute and a half, 2-minute scene, 3-minute scene, maybe? I don't think it's that long.
Maybe.
But by the time you leave that scene, you're like, okay, Lois now respects Clark as a journalist. Lex despises Clark because he's asking the hard questions. Or despises, is more like annoyed, actually. He despises Superman, or he will eventually.
Yeah.
But he's more annoyed right now. He's in the annoyance stage. But then you also find out that the reason Clark's able to ask those hard-hitting questions is because Lois at one point had a relationship with Lex, which I totally forgot about, by the way. And I think, not that she's held back by that, but she's got a certain closeness to that character built in before we even meet the two of them.
Yeah.
That I think gives Clark a little bit of a different perspective.
It's a little gross. I really don't love her having dated Lex, honestly. I mean, I just have to kind of assume that it was all of 3 dates in a 2-week span or something.
Oh, it probably wasn't that long. I just think, though, I like the idea, whether it's like the dating, I like that there is a pre-existing rapport outside of her career as a journalist.
That's fair, yeah.
They went the romantic route, but I don't think it necessarily needed to be that. I just like that rapport on a personal level already existed.
No, I agree with that. And I think we can blame the romance angle on Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, because the love quadrilateral between Clark, Lex, Lois, and Superman was much more pronounced on that show, because it was a romance show.
Right. Oh, boy.
And she did actually almost marry Lex on that show. So I think that's where we can blame it, because that would have been exceptionally fresh in the pop cultural consciousness when this show came out.
And for listeners out there who might not be as familiar with the adventures of Lois and Clark, that show was super popular at the time.
I loved it. It's the only Superman show that has put the serious focus on the romance between Lois and Clark and made Superman stuff secondary. I'm not sure that I would declare it has aged well per se, but it was a very revolutionary take at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Agreed. Maybe, Joshua, if you want to move on to talk a little bit about the kind of the core conflict of this first two-parter, or well, it's two-parter. It's three-parter, parts 2 and 3 that feel like a two-parter. So basically, after you kind of get all those relationships established, you have, Lex is showing off his $1 billion, which, by the way, $1 billion in the mid-90s was way more extravagant than it is now. So he might as well have been Dr. Evil saying $90 billion robots.
It's true. It's true. And we're just going to assume that that's R&D and not just manufacturing cost, because otherwise, who were you going to sell this to, Lex?
Who were you selling it to? Where did you... seriously, what materials cost $1 billion? Like, I don't...
Yeah, that's why it's all R&D. That also includes the R&D. I've just declared it for my own personal headcanon.
Yeah, there you go. I think it's a pretty basic Superman story, but I think a good one to start things off on. Hey, Lex is actually conning Metropolis and trying to make a few bucks off of it by working with some sort of foreign buyer. And by the way, it's a super generic robot, but we're going to use this super generic story to introduce even more potential bad guys for down the road, like John Corbin.
Yes, I really like... now, I don't like how boring and drab the robot looks, right? But I do like how relatively simple the battle suit is, because the plot is actually pretty complex. Not Byzantine, but just Lex is fooling Metropolis, and Lex is fooling the United States government. And he is also making $1 billion from Kasnia, which, asterisk, we're going to hear about Kasnia a lot over the course of several animated series. But he is working so many angles, and Clark and Lois busted out, basically, like figure the whole thing out. And then when it goes completely off the rails, here's Superman to solve it. It's really kind of a microcosm of the perfect, it's like the apotheosis of a Superman plot.
Right. And again, I think as an introduction, it was perfect. It's exactly what we needed. I think it's exactly what we needed because it's all about establishing the status quo. Because everything we get after this is going to build off of this status quo. And the status quo will change, but it's good that this does the job, laying the groundwork. I just like how it paints a very good picture of how Metropolis works. What are the roles all these characters play in the city at large? So I think all of that works extremely well. Joshua, how did you feel about the action beats in this particular two-parter?
Okay, I think that all of the action scenes are very good, especially the Smallville rescue and the fight with the battlesuit.
Yeah.
Those are both so dynamic and make such great use, especially the battlesuit fight, makes such great use of like the surrounding environs, just of where they are. The action scenes are top notch as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, no, I agree. Especially I'm thinking like the 90s, on the budget it was, in the mid-90s. I think the action's very well done. The explosions are pretty cool. I like the set pieces. I will say, by the time we're done with the series, I'm going to be really tired of seeing Superman land planes. I'm just going to say that right now. Because it happens a lot in this series. Yeah. But it's okay. In fact, and here's the thing. I always say this knowing that we're going to talk about World's Finest pretty soon. And it is literally the first set piece of the episode is landing a plane.
And the last one, too, well, they don't land it, but we'll get to it.
Yeah. So a lot of Superman landing planes. But I think, the robot fight was great.
Well, the plane landing is not a fantastic scene on its own, right? Like, it's not super dynamic, but it's got some beats that are really good. Like I talked about the learning curve, the mistakes that he makes, because he's never had to land a plane with his bare hands before, Right. In the run-up to that, he dodges a missile because he doesn't know if he can take a missile, because how would he know? I also like that he's running away from the bullets in the fight with the battlesuit because he's not sure that he can take the hit. And then when he does take the hit, he hasn't quite figured out how to use his flight to counteract the impact yet. So he's getting knocked all over creation. I really like all that.
Well, but I like when he does kind of realize what he can take. I love at the point where he catches the bullets and throws them like little BBs or something, It was super cool. I loved it. It was that was probably, of all the weird Superman things that happened in this episode as far as his powers go, that was probably my favorite, because it was like he was like flicking them around, you know?
It's very casual. Like it's also not that dangerous. I mean, the bullet's spent, you know, like he's throwing it hard enough to make sparks, but he's not throwing it at them to shoot them like they were doing to him. It's so casually powerful that makes those guys duck and cover. It's a real Superman move, I feel. He never threw a punch at those guys. Why would he?
No, he didn't need to. Yeah. But to your point, this is him kind of learning what he can and can't do, which is why, you know, at first he's getting knocked around, but by the time he's done fighting the robot, he's taken a missile. So I think it's a great way to scale where is Superman with his powers today, and I think it's going to just really highlight how much he grows as the series goes along as well. So one other thing I want to talk about, of course, you already referenced it, was the Superman confronting Lex at the end. And again, talking about how quickly they established this dynamic really well. We've already talked in depth with the Clark, him confronting Clark from the journalism interview side. I really love this. He's basically admitting guilt, and Superman, of course, having super hearing. Here's this whole conversation where he's basically like, what do you mean I'm not getting my $1 billion? And he opens the window and he says, you see, Superman, which I thought was funny.
Lex is deliciously dismissive. It's very good.
It's fantastic. I love it. I love how arrogant he is. He's like, I own Metropolis. My technology built it. My will keeps it going, and nearly 2/3 of its people work for me, whether they know it or not. And even you have to admit, it's a model of efficiency. And the fact that he's like, I actually have bigger ambitions to do the same thing on a more global scale. I'd like to, if you would consider working together. And then Superman just the whole time, stone-faced, he's got the arm. I love it when Superman crosses his arms. It's like, nah, man, I'm not taking any of this. I'm watching you. You know, I love it.
It's very good. Yeah, it's very good. It's very low key, honestly. I mean, Lex is like laying it out there. Like, let me offer you a job. You and me will take over the world. And instead it's, I'm watching you. And flies away, leaving Luthor in an impotent rage. Like, don't you move away from me.
Don't you walk away from me. Good. Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And I will save this for the sake of time. I'm going to save this for future episodes, but I'm just going to throw out there that whenever it's firing on all cylinders, the Lex Superman rivalry, arch nemesis type stuff, I love it. I love it so much.
Oh yeah, no, they do a really good job with it. They
do
really
a great job. I love how even like the ideals they represent are so opposite of each other. There's just enough similarity. Yes. There's just enough similarity in their ambitions that you kind of see it both ways, but clearly Lex is a monster. But they both think that they're making the world better. Lex it has to be done his way, and he feels like he's above all any and all rules because his way is the best way. It's a quote unquote model of efficiency. And when you're a businessman, efficiency is number one. So I love that stuff.
It's really good, and segues directly into the last big relationship that we have to talk about in this show, which is between Superman and Metropolis.
Yes.
They don't love him immediately, but they do by the end of the episode, and I like it. I like both of those things.
Well, I like how they're not sure about him at first, but because he is able to win the goodwill of Lois Lane and the Daily Planet, it starts the positive media buzz. So he knows who to get on his side to paint a more positive image of himself. And I don't think it's calculating. I just think he's trying to make friends, you know?
It's actually both honest and pragmatic.
Yes.
Because it would be very dishonest for Clark Kent to get that interview. That would be beyond his journalistic ethics, I think.
Right.
But the added problem there is it puts a secret identity in jeopardy. And also, who's Clark Kent right now? You know, Lois brings a cachet there. You're absolutely right about that. So yeah, it is a little calculated, but I feel like it's the kind of calculated that starts with, well, I can't interview myself.
Right.
So who am I going to get to interview?
Right. Yeah. I don't think he walked in and said, I need the people to love me. I think it's more of, I need to show these people I'm here to help them.
Well, I think he definitely wanted them to love him a little bit, or at least Ma does, because Ma really doesn't want anyone to think that he's like that lunatic in Gotham.
Yeah, that was a nice little nod. I love that. So before we close out with our alternate media recs, Joshua, we should probably at least address the stinger, which, hey, it's a stinger. Not post-credits, but it's basically a post-credit stinger before the credits. Brainiac has been rediscovered after, 20, 30 years of floating around in space. He has been discovered by some sort of alien race, and he has now hijacked their ship, so he is out there doing things.
Yep, he's going to be a problem. And as a bookend, I think that kind of ties a bow back around to Krypton in a way that, on its own doesn't justify Krypton, but kind of, adds to the pile of reasons I'm not that mad about 22 minutes of Krypton.
Right. Yeah, again, framing it in the I will say this, framing it in the context of the larger DCAU, I do feel like we get so much from that Krypton, 22 minutes of Krypton. There's a lot of mileage you get because of all the just the deeper ties we get with Brainiac. I mean, that travels all the way through Justice League Unlimited. So,
yes. It is the major impetus of 2 different seasons of Justice League.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's big time.
Well, Joshua, I think we've covered this pretty well. Would you say overall this is a successful introduction to Superman?
Absolutely. I mean, it's formative for a lot of people, and it is for a reason.
Yep, agreed. I am one of those people. This is, in my mind, this is probably the best version of Superman. Like, if I think of like a traditional Superman narrative, this is the best version we have, that I have, because Richard Donner feels like it's from a different time, and I appreciate it. And then obviously we have the Man of Steel movies, which are definitely, as the definitive Superman, a huge miss. I would say for millennials, myself included, this is it. This is definitive Superman, and I think this origin story is a home run in that sense. Well, all right, Joshua. But before we close out the show, we are going to continue closing the way we always do on an anime discussion. That is with some alternate media recommendations. So if listeners out there enjoyed this episode, what is something else they should consider watching, reading, or playing? So we'll start with you on this one.
I'm going very on the nose here, and I'm going to recommend 2 different Superman books. I'm going to recommend Superman Birthright because it is the best Superman origin. So it's written by Mark Waid, who loves Superman. If Mark Waid has a religion, it's Superman. And it's drawn beautifully by Lionel Francis Yu. And it really blows out what would have fit between Smallville and Metropolis in this story. Not to say that it integrates well, but it mostly focuses on that interim. What was a young Clark Kent doing before he figured out that Superman was a thing he had to be? He was still helping people. He was still searching for the truth. What did that look like? And it also takes another angle on that, the right amount of angst about his heritage, comes at it from a little different angle, but does a great job of it. The other one I'm going to recommend is All-Star Superman, because All-Star Superman is the greatest Superman story ever, ever, ever.
It's wild.
And I particularly like it in comparison to this because it does Superman's origin in 1 page, 4 panels, and 8 words. And I'm not saying another word about it because if you haven't read All-Star Superman, go do it now.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And also, read it. There is a movie version of it that is okay.
Skip it. They cut 2 of the most integral pieces of that story out. Don't see the animated movie. Read the book. The art's better too. Frank Quitely does an amazing job. Grant Morrison wrote it. It's great. Skip the damn movie. Trust me. Caleb, what about yourself? Tell me about your alternate media recommendations.
So I was reaching a little deeper on the, not deeper, but I was reaching a different. I was looking at it from a different angle. I was like, okay, what sticks out to me about this episode that's not like necessarily 100% this traditional Superman? And it was the fact that Jor-El is in fact a doomsday prepper. So a storm's a-coming. It's coming. So that's right. I'm going to recommend Jeff Nichols' wildly underrated film starring Michael Shannon and Jessica Chastain, Take Shelter. It is a great freaking movie that not enough people have seen, quite frankly. Basically, Michael Shannon's saying, hey, there's a storm that's going to flood the planet. It's coming, and we better prepare. And everyone's like, you're crazy, dude. You're freaking crazy. And Jessica Chastain, his wife or girlfriend, the entire movie's like, okay, is he crazy? Is he not crazy? I'm starting to see, I'm seeing evidence of both. And it's about, what is that doing to the relationship? Is he crazy? And what is the outcome of listening or not listening to him? Fantastic movie. Again, Jeff Nichols, Take Shelter. Go check it out. Secondly, is like this is a huge downer, but I was thinking about other end of the world stories, and I ended up on Lars von Trier's Melancholia, starring Kirsten Dunst. It's interesting, basically people coming to terms with their last night on Earth. And, I don't want to spoil the movie too much, but it's more about the characters. Hey, I'm going to get married, even if it's not what I wanted, but it's what I think I'm supposed to do. So, hey, I'm going to be real depressed about it. Melancholia. It's a real downer, but it's a stunning movie. Good soundtrack, visually powerful. One of the better films I think Lars von Trier's ever made. So check that out. And lastly, because as our listeners, I'm going to try really hard not to overdo it, but I am...
Oh, you're just doing this to mess with me. You're just doing this to put your finger in my eye. How dare you?
I am a Smallville zombie from way back, so I'd be remiss if I didn't at least recommend a Smallville story.
Something's remiss here, that's for sure.
Smallville, it's 20% a really great Superman show. It's 80% what the heck is going on. The episode I'm going to recommend touches on Lex Luthor, who I think is a fantastic villain, and I love what they do with him on that show, generally speaking. It is Season 7, Episode 16, Descent. It is, I won't spoil it, but I'll just put it this way. This is the episode where he fully steps into his villainy and accepts who he is and decides he's going to be Superman's arch nemesis. It's great. It's really the climactic episode of his arc, I would say. For the 7 seasons up until that episode had been building to that episode. And I think it pays off really well. And again, I just love the rivalry shenanigans between Superman and Lex. So that is one of the 20% of episodes that are good. And in fact, I would go as far as to say it's very good. By early aughts, asterisks, by early aughts network television standards. So
broken clocks, my friend. Broken clocks.
Very well. We're going to hear that a lot again.
That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb is at CMastersTalk, and I am at Joshua Unruh. And the hashtag is animated discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, Joshua, people can always find me over as the editor-in-chief and a contributor at thecinematropolis.com, a website that specializes in in-depth film analysis and critique. We have in-depth essays you can find. We also have a podcast, if you prefer to listen, not read, called The Cinematic Schematic. And you can find all of that all at thecinematropolis.com.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And lastly, the links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter are all very easy to find in the show notes, so check those out there. Thank you so much for joining us for this animated discussion. So we'll be back next time to talk about World's Finest, which is technically an episode of Superman the Animated Series, but also features a familiar cape and cowl character. That's right, we're doing the first time Batman and Superman met in the DC animated universe. I can't wait to talk with you about it, Joshua.
I'm very excited also, but until then, look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's an animated discussion.